All right. Hello, everyone. This is Mike Dockry. I'm a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation and a member of the Intertribal Timber Council's Research Subcommittee and a faculty member at the University of Minnesota in the Forest Resource Department focused on tribal natural resource management. And I'm here with my colleague.
I'm Amit Pradhananga. I'm a research associate at the Department of Forest Resources, and I focus broadly on the social, policy, human aspects of natural resources.
And today we're here to talk about our project that is a tribal research needs assessment that was supported by the Intertribal Timber Council. And we're going to give an introduction and an update on this project. I will say we have a few other team members that were part of this project, Adrian Layton, Sarah Hoagland, and Jim Derglow. We'd like to also give some acknowledgments to folks that were a part of this and helped make it happen either through funding or support. Dr. Hardy and Dr. Janet Lee Garcia, who passed on during this project. We want to thank them for finding Forest Service support, thank them for their help in bringing our team together to get this really important work done. Also, the Intertribal Timber Council itself, the Research Subcommittee, and all of the people that responded to the survey, and that was taken from ITC member tribes. We had a lot of student involvement from Northern Arizona University. You can see the list of their names there that helped us out calling up people and helping make sure that people took the survey. We also had support from data management from the University of Minnesota and a few other, they're not anonymous, but reviewers of the survey to help us out. Forest Service came from a lot of our salaries, so financial support came from a lot of our salaries and the project. Forest Service, Salish Kootenai College, University of Minnesota, Northern Arizona University, and Weyerhaeuser through the interns. Okay, so now jumping right in here to the research needs assessment. This all started a few years ago. In fact, in 2012, there was a paper that was written, Beatty and Layton did this paper to look at what were some of the needs that tribes had around natural resource management. And I'm going to share three quick tables for you to show what came out of that survey. And essentially what we're going to talk about today is a survey that we did in 2019 that updates this information to see where we are today. So in 2012, the top 5 research priorities, the topical areas, were water quality, fish and wildlife management, integration of traditional knowledge and Western science, mechanisms to improve knowledge sharing, and invasive species. There were a few impediments to research that were identified. That includes access to internet to get research results, financial and staff resources that were needed to apply the research, financial and staff resources for monitoring and evaluating, reporting on results, and finally financial and staff resources to address local issues, right? So these are some impediments: funding, people, time, and internet access. And finally, the other thing we'll share about the 2012 report is that the top 4 areas for research participation, and that is establishing research priorities, securing financial and staff resources to apply, again, also same thing for monitoring and evaluating and reporting the results, and developing partnerships with research institutions. The project we did, really, the goals of the project were to inform forestry research planning efforts and establish priorities that are aligned with the needs identified by tribal natural resource managers. We split our survey up into 3 groups based on the past work that I just mentioned. 1, research needs, and we broke these into broad themes and individual topics in those themes, and I'll kind of get into that a little bit. We also talked about the accessibility to published research. So that's, where do you go to get it? Is it available to you? You know, do you go to the library? Do you go to the internet, et cetera? And then finally, we had a series of questions that talked about participating in research activities itself. Again, this mirrors the 2012 study. For survey design, we have several things that we looked at, but first of all, we started with reading that 2012 survey questions. We had discussions with ITC research subcommittee and the project team itself. We started in summer of 2019 with an online survey. So we basically started at the beginning of the summer. The survey went through the end of the summer. During the symposium that year, we had paper copies on hand at the symposium. And then in the middle of the summer, we had the NAU students call up different natural resource managers' offices to remind folks to take the survey. In total, we had about 46 total questions organized into 3 parts, like I said: topics, themes, access to research, and participation in research. Here's some of the results. We had about 200 different emails and contacts with tribal natural resource managers, had about 86 that started, or 89 that started the survey, and 59 that completed it. So that's about a 30% response rate. That's an okay response rate these days. It always would be better to have more, but I think when you see the breakdown and what we got, it's very good and helpful information. 43% of the respondents were members of federally recognized tribes. Most of the respondents, so 78%, were male. Again, it would be nice to have a little bit better breakdown on gender. And most of the survey response people were from the forestry profession. The one in 2012, it was more dominated by the wildlife professionals. And here you can see a breakdown on the regions. I think I won't go into it, but it essentially mirrors where we have tribes in the United States: the Southwest, Pacific Northwest, Eastern, Southern region. You can kind of see the breakdown there. Now I'm going to switch over to report on the results that we got from the research topics. So what topics are of interest to tribal resource managers? When we look at broad themes, these are the 3 broad themes that came out. And this does sort of reflect what we saw in 2012. So water was the most important broad theme. We had a 5-point scale. Extremely important as number 5, and not important at all was number 1. So you can see all of these averaged over 4.0. So between very important and extremely important. Water, particularly the water quality, the cultural importance of water, and water quantity. The second most important broad theme was fish and wildlife. And in particular, folks were interested in information around culturally important species. Finally, traditional ecological knowledge. We included in this tribal youth involvement and input into decision-making, natural resource decision-making from elders or cultural committees within the tribe. So these are the broad themes, and these all came basically from the first survey. We broke them down in a similar manner. So these are the top 3 that we had. When we look to the individual topics within all of the themes, and we just looked at the top rated topics, these are what people told us, the top 10 research topics: forest health, silviculture, workforce development and training, water quality, fuels management, fish and wildlife responses to harvest treatments, to forestry treatments, growth and yield, planting and reforestation, and invasive species. So again, we had broad themes. We saw water, fish and wildlife, and traditional ecological knowledge. Each one of those had themes. We called them topics. And when we asked people to say, what are your top 3 topics? This is what we found. When we look at the other broad themes that we found, these are the important research needs underneath them. So I'm going to break these down a little bit here. Under the forest management theme, again, our top ones were water, fish and wildlife, and traditional knowledge. These are the other themes that came out of the survey, or that we had in the survey. So for forest management, folks wanted information on inventory, planning, silviculture, and GIS. And then a little bit less important, but still important, was planting and reforestation, growth and yield, site-specific information, and biomass utilization. For forest economics and forest products, we saw people wanting to know about development of new forest products. That was the most important information need under that theme. Under the forest protection theme, people wanted to look at forest health, invasive species, and then the Tribal Forest Protection Act and adjacent landowner activities. Under climate change, and it's interesting that in climate change, in the paper we go into it a little bit more detail, but it didn't average over 4.0 for any of them. We think that some of the themes or some of the topics were incorporated into the other themes, but climate change, the important research under climate change would be early indications of it, phenology, implementation of adaptation projects, how do we do this? And then the planning aspects of both adaptation and mitigation, and finally, vulnerability assessments. Under our broad theme of fire, information needs that would help tribal forest managers was more information on wildland fire management, fuel management, and in particular, indigenous burning. Finally, social science, which is where I work mostly, workforce development and training were important, and then federal and state partnerships, as well as policies related to forest management. At this point, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Amit, and he's going to talk about some of the statistical operations we did to look at differences amongst respondents for these different research needs. So Amit, please take it away.
Right. So we conducted factor analysis with a subset of items. And the idea there is to really group these items and identify broader themes that are related to research information needs. And so here's, the slide you see here, it shows 6 different categories or themes around information needs. They're innovative markets and approaches, forest operation, post-fire response and valuation, set of items related to fire, resilience, long-term forestry, indigenous burning. And once we identify these broader factors or themes, then the next step for us was to look at, are there differences between tribal and non-tribal members? And then are there differences between folks who've worked less than 25 years in forestry and those that have worked more than 25 years? And for that, we use t-tests, and we'll share some of these findings here. So looking at the differences between tribal and non-tribal members, we found that there were some differences between those two groups, particularly tribal members rated a few of these factors as more important than non-tribal members. And Mike, if you could click that button, it should show. Yep, so there were a few of these, and one more click. Yep, so these 4 themes, for these 4 themes, they were rated higher or more important by tribal members than non-tribal members. And then there are, after the next click, we'll see these, and one more. These 3 themes, indigenous burning, innovative market and approaches, and post-fire response and valuation, were rated more important by those who've worked in forestry less than 25 years than those that have worked in forestry for more than 25 years.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And that's something that we took beyond the previous study. So the previous study in 2012 didn't really look at any sort of statistical differences in the respondents. And we see that this is moving it forward. We see this fitting in as well with the IFMAT reporting, where we look at different sort of differences between tribal, non-tribal, different types of employees, et cetera. So this was great. And this was, I'll just brag on Amit a little bit. This is why we brought Amit into the team, to help us do this kind of analysis. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about access to research. So those would be great themes and topics for researchers to be working on. But if folks are working on stuff that tribes don't have access to, what does that mean? So these are a series of questions related to, where do you get this information, or how do we communicate it? When we ask people, where do you go to find research? Most people, as you can imagine, go to the internet. So 90% of the respondents went to the internet or saw the internet as extremely important for finding research results. 86%, however, that's a pretty similar number, right? That's not that different. Go to subject matter experts. So maybe they call up me if they're working on some climate adaptation planning, or if they want to do some statistical analysis on their social science research, they might go to Amit as subject matter experts. And then finally, I added this one on the graph because I thought it was important, but 84% of the respondents said it was extremely or very important to have time to read and study research results. It's not enough to get a paper in somebody's hand. It's not enough to talk to somebody either at a conference or over the phone or over email. But that person, the tribal manager, really needs some time to think about that. What does the research mean, and how to apply it in their own situation? When we asked about where do people get information, what research publications were important, 69% said online scientific journals were important. And I know the research subcommittee, we've been talking about that for many years, about how do we make sure that member tribes have access, or how could we assure that they have access to online journals. 69% say that's very or extremely important. Forest Service general technical reports, those are also extremely important places for folks to get information. The ITC meetings and conferences like the Symposium that we're in right now, 48% said that's another important place to go for the research roundups and information that we have at the conferences. SAF publications and ITC publications, that's kind of the breakdown there. I will note that only 33% or less, this went between 33% and like 16%, were very important or extremely important for getting information from textbooks, the Forest Service's Science You Can Use bulletins, Society of American Forester meetings, and then I think the lowest was libraries, which hurts me a little bit because I love libraries. But I think with the dawn of online information and access to high quality research libraries, that is not a surprising result. Okay, the final piece of our research project was participation in research. And I'm going to wrap up in the next 5 minutes, so I'll try to keep myself and Amit to this. But participation in research. Important research activities rated by respondents vary to extremely important, include things like getting staff and financial resources to apply the results. 84% said it was very to extremely important to establish research priorities, essentially for the tribes themselves, meaning an outsider doesn't set the priority. Me as a research faculty member at the university, I don't set it. The tribe sets it and I collaborate with that. 85% said it was important to protect tribal data. And that includes protecting data sovereignty, but also like how is the data shared? And then finally, it was important to develop research partnerships with various research institutions. So 87% said that. Who are people working with? We asked that question. 80% of folks were working with universities on research, 72% working with the federal agencies. Quite a jump here now down to the state agencies. Only about 36% were working with state agencies on research and 32% with nonprofits. And here's a big one, only 16% were working with tribal colleges. I see a lot of opportunity to increase our work with tribal colleges. And hopefully the new funding that comes from Max Stennis can start helping us do that. The forestry research funding from USDA is now going to tribal colleges. So that will hopefully help us partner more on research. Again, we did some of the statistical analysis of this participation in research, and I'm gonna hand it back over to Amit to explain this.
Yep. So like last time, we did factor analysis and identified these three broad themes: research design, communication, priorities, and research sovereignty. We found that there were no statistically significant difference between tribal and non-tribal members, meaning on average, the ratings of these three categories was kind of the same. But we did find that the ratings of these three themes or factors of participation in research were quite different for those who worked less than or more than 25 years. So those who worked relatively fewer years in forestry believe that these areas of participation research were more important than those that have worked more than 25 years in forestry.
Great. So the penultimate slide here, the conclusions and next steps. What do we think about the conclusions? Well, the goal again was really to help broaden forestry research to support tribal forest management. So we wanted to identify topics of interest to tribes. I don't know how many times I get emails or phone calls from colleagues of mine that are not well connected with tribal natural resource management, and the question is, how can my research help tribes? Well, this is a first step in at least identifying some topics and priorities that tribes have, so that other scientists can, say, hey, look, I was reading this, this report, and I realized that I do work on water quantity, and this is a high priority topic for some tribal managers. Let's talk about how we could form a partnership. So that's important, I think, important part of this work. The 5 topics, if I just pull out forest health, silviculture, workforce development, fuels, and fish and wildlife, those were really the 5 topics. They were fairly consistent with the last study as well, but that's an important conclusion. There are higher importance rated, as we just heard Amit describe, between tribal members and non-tribal members on all these topics that I've listed: post-fire response and valuation, resilience and long-term forestry, protecting tribal data, and indigenous burning. So the tribal members rated those higher importance than non-tribal members. And that's an important finding. And finally, like I mentioned, I think these results, or we think these results, can inform research priorities for federal, university, and others to align with tribal resource managers' needs. Where are we going with this? The paper right now is in the review process, so we are responding to comments that we received from the reviewers, and this paper should be published this year as we respond to those comments and continue through this review process. It's never a fast thing, so that's just how it is. But we're glad to share the results with you here today. We're happy to follow up with anyone right now if you have any questions, or afterwards at any of the sessions, or you can email or call us up too. So thank you, miigwech, everybody.
Thank you, Amit and Mike. We do have a couple questions already sitting in our Q&A box. One from Zachary Erickson, and I'm gonna have us answer that live. And I recommend taking a look at Zachary's question. Bringing t-tests into your qualitative analysis is an interesting step to take in this type of research. Do you have an idea of what type of sample size you would need to make inferences on the Native American population? Is making inferences on the population appropriate or important in this research?
That's a good one for Amit.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question in terms of sample size. You know, we do want a good, robust sample size to be able to assess differences between different subgroups. You know, the important thing, though, is more in terms of research design and being able to develop a design where you are able to get not only a large sample, but also a good representative sample. So if we're trying to make inferences about, you know, regional differences, it's important we have a sample that is representative of, you know, regions across the US, for example. In terms of sample size, you know, we do want to have, you know, ideally we'd have a little bit larger sample size, but, you know, given the population that we're looking at, we did get a fairly good response rate. So the population itself is not that large in terms of kind of the professionals in this area. But, you know, I think that's a great area for future research, is if we wanted to expand this out into, say, for example, general population surveys. So if we wanted to reach out to tribal communities across the country, then we definitely want to have a much larger sample size to be able to generalize.
I'll just add on there too that the survey itself was mostly quantitative social science survey, you know, the Likert scale 1 to 5 ratings of things, you know, what's more important, or how important is each topic or each question. We did have some open-ended questions, and that helped us, I think, a little bit. It wasn't a real like robust qualitative data set, I think, due to the kind of a smaller number. Plus, we had 46 questions. That's a lot. If you were writing in the other box every time, I think you might get tired on it. So I think there could be opportunities as well to dive into this with some more qualitative interviews and maybe focus groups type research.
Thank you. And we also have, well, the questions are coming in, and I think we're going to take the next two and then we're going to have to break. One question is, what are some blocks in working with state agencies?
I can just, this is just from my experience working in this realm. I think some of the blocks are, not all the states have comprehensive consultation policies for working with tribes, like we have at the federal level. And if you go back even a couple decades, a lot of the lawsuits for treaty rights were against the states for not allowing tribes to exercise their rights. So there's been a little bit of antagonism, to say the least, with some of the state agencies. So we need to overcome some of that. But I think the biggest, from my point of view, one of the biggest things is to have consultation policies developed by each state agency. That would really take us a long way. The federal government did it under Obama. He had the requirement for each agency to have consultation policies explicitly. The state of Minnesota, for example, also has a requirement now for each agency to have a consultation policy developed and a yearly meeting with each tribe in the state. I think that's going to take us a long way of breaking down some of those barriers.
And it looks like Vida is providing a lot of great resources in the chat box, so I encourage folks to save that chat box. And then our last question is from Allison York regarding use of research results. Did you include the research products developed by the Joint Fire Science Program Fire Science Exchange Network members? Example, Northern Rockies Fire Science Consortium.
I don't fully understand that question, but we mostly relied on the previous ITC survey, and essentially we're kind of replicating that survey that they did. So we have a little bit of intro in the paper, kind of lit review stuff. I don't remember if Joint Fire Science was if we cited them, but I think it's worth looking at. As a few people have pointed out in the chat, there's some interesting results that we could incorporate, and it's a pretty good timing. I think we can do some of that in some of our responses to the comments.
Okay, great, thank you.